Hello and welcome to BYJU'S Exam Prep IAS. Welcome to another session on economy this week, wherein we'll be taking up all the important economy related articles which have appeared from 23rd July to 29th July 2022 and analyze these particular articles. Let's begin the discussion. The first article for the day is related to Household Consumption Expenditure Survey, HCES. Or else I'll start using another short form here, CES. Don't be confused here. CES, I'm simply referring to Household Consumption Expenditure Surveys. Now first and foremost, I'm pretty sure all of you have learnt about concept of GDP, gross domestic product, concept of inflation, etc. And whenever you talk about all of this, or even let's say in the context of measurement of poverty, generally there is a concept of monthly per capita expenditure, MPC, monthly per capita expenditure, MPC. What is this idea of a MPC? On an average, how much expenditure is incurred, that is measured. And we use this particular data of MPC in terms of, let's say, determining what kind of goods or services are consumed by households, in terms of determining what should be the basket for measurement of inflation, how should we measure poverty, etc. Now, whenever you talk about this kind of a data, one survey which will help you in determining all of this particular data is Household Consumption Expenditure Surveys, HCES. This is a quinquennial survey. It is a quinquennial survey. What do you mean by this? It is conducted once every 5 years. Remember this. This survey is conducted once every 5 years. Many of you will basically start calculating 5 years from now and come to a conclusion. So it simply means earlier survey should have been conducted 5 years ago. Is it true? Yes, the survey was conducted 5 years ago, but Government of India clarified that there are certain concerns over the quality of the data, and that is the precise reason the recent survey or the previous survey was shelved. The data was not made public. Although there was a lot of speculation regarding the outcomes of the survey, let's not get into that because the government itself stated the data will not be made public. So let's not get into that particular debate. What you need to understand is the survey which is public right now, the HCES survey which is public or the results of which are public was conducted back in the year 2011 and 2012. Okay, the 11 and 12 data was made public by the government. And this particular survey is conducted by NSSO, National Sample Survey Office, which functions under Ministry of Statistics and Program Implementation. Now, in this particular survey, what they do is, they will collect the data of expenditure on the goods, services, food, non-food items, etc. and use that particular data for estimating various, or by collecting this data, they will estimate various other indicators. We consider the expenditure on food items as well as non-food items such as, let's say, clothing, education, healthcare, etc. And this data is not only collected from urban households, it is also collected from rural households. Certain number of households samples are taken, and from these households the data will be collated and the results will be published. Government says the current survey will be conducted in 3 rounds. That is basically this particular survey which will go on for 1 year starting from July till June next year. There will be 3 rounds of data collection during this particular survey. Why I'm mentioning this? If you take the earlier survey, that is 2011 and 2012, data was collected only once. But now government says we'll collect the data 3 times, or 3 rounds of data collection will happen. These are certain very, very important points regarding Household Consumption Expenditure Survey. Now, based on this particular discussion, I've given a question here. Consider the following statements regarding HCES. It is conducted by the Ministry of Finance once every 5 years. The latter part of the statement is correct. The first part is wrong. Hence, the statement 1 is wrong. Under this, the data for food as well as non-food items are considered. Statement 2 is correct. Third, the data is collected for urban as well as rural households. Third statement is also true. So second and third are correct. Right option for this particular question is option C. The next article is regarding NRI deposits. Couple of weeks ago, we have discussed reforms or the measures which have been taken by Reserve Bank of India in order to attract a lot of dollar inflows into India. One of those particular reforms was RBI allowing the banks to decide the interest rates on the NRI deposits. The NRIs will bring in a lot of dollars into India, keep these particular deposits or these dollars in rupee deposits and earn certain interest rate. And RBI, in order to attract these particular dollars flows into India, ask the banks, you decide the interest rate. Earlier I had a restriction, I used to impose certain conditions on it. I've withdrawn these particular conditions. Now the banks can decide these lending rates. And following this particular, let's say, the guidelines of Reserve Bank of India, many banks such as SBI, HDFC, etc., they have increased the interest rate. So after 2 weeks, there is an evaluation. This article basically evaluates or gives the evaluation of this measure that has been introduced by RBI to attract the inflow of the foreign currencies. Now, same tool was used earlier by RBI when there was a taper tantrum back in the year 2013. And as a result of this particular tool, specifically relaxation of this, we absorbed or we basically observed that around $34 billion worth of foreign currencies actually flew into India in the form of NRI deposits. But after 2 weeks of relaxing this particular regulations or let's say guidelines, the article simply says the flow of the foreign currencies has been normal. As usual, the flow has been normal. There has been no sudden surge or let's say a rise in the foreign currency inflow in the form of NRI deposits. What is the reason? When RBI has implemented this particular reform, expecting a spike, a rise in NRI deposits or let's say dollar inflow in the form of NRI deposits, why this is not being observed? The reasons are following. First thing, the banks have increased the interest rate, no doubt, but the rise or let's say the hike in the interest rate has been 25 basis points, 30 basis points like this. So the foreign investors, when they look at these deposits, which are rupee deposits mind you, they don't feel huge amount of returns because there is a hike of interest rate, let's say by only 25 basis points. That's the first thing. In simple terms, imagine you are the investor, you want to invest in these particular deposits. The bank has announced that they will increase the interest rate by 0.25%. That rise of 0.25% is not attractive enough for you to bring in money and invest in these deposits. That's the first thing. Second thing, the banks also do not have any incentive to promote these kind of deposits. Why? Understand the logic here. Whenever a bank will collect deposits, let's say in the form of the deposits within the domestic market, they generally pay an interest rate or they end up paying an interest rate in the range of around 6%. And the data here given shows that when the banks will collect these particular deposits, which are foreign currencies mind you, they will end up paying more than 6% to the extent of 7%, including the charges that they will have to introduce or let's say they will have to pay for entering into different forward contracts. That is, they basically go for hedging contracts in order to protect themselves from these kind of exchange rate risk. So if you include all of these particular charges, they end up paying or incurring an interest rate of around 6 to 7%, which is more than the rupee deposit that they have collected from the domestic market. But earlier, what was the reason? Why there was a huge inflow back in the 2013? The banks were given an option. There's a swap option which was given by RBI, which reduced the exchange rate risk for these particular banks which accepted these particular deposits. Right? So that particular option today is not given by RBI to these banks, and that is the reason even the banks are not very enthusiastic with respect to promotion of these particular products. Third very important reason, in the global market, the yield rates have started increasing. And when the yield rates in the global market starts increasing, why will a foreign investor, let's say NRI, look at only India to invest in these particular deposits? There is no incentive for him. Fourth very important point, NRIs have invested in bond market, but recently the bond market has been affected and the returns of these NRIs also have taken a hit. And these are some of the reasons which have been cited in this article to showcase that despite the reforms of RBI in terms of, let's say, relaxation given to the banks to decide the interest rate, and RBI telling the banks, if you attract these deposits, will not count it as a part of CRR as well as SLR requirement. Despite all of these particular reforms, there has been a very lukewarm response which has been given to these measures, or let's say these kind of deposit products which have been offered by the banks to NRIs. So this is a discussion related to NRI deposits. Let me go to another article. The Government of India or the Cabinet very recently has cleared a revival package for BSNL, a public sector undertaking. One of the very important points that you need to understand, lot of data has been provided, numbers have been provided, you don't have to mug up all the numbers. The reason that the Government of India has provided is very, very simple. One, Government of India says BSNL will help me in achieving various social welfare objectives. Sir, what do you mean by this? How BSNL will help Government of India to achieve any social welfare objective? Substantial amount of, let's say, the users are there in rural part of India, and this government says I have to cater to these particular users. For example, fiber broadband users are there in rural parts of India. So if there is, let's say, a duopoly in the telecom sector, if there are only two companies, which is right a concern for the telecom sector now, then there is very less competition, and the customers, whether they are in urban part of India or rural part of India, now they are at the mercy of these particular two private sector companies. So government says, one, there are certain consumers or let's say users in rural part of India. Through BSNL, I want to keep on providing these particular services at affordable prices to this particular users. Second, if I shut down the BSNL, because if you have been following the discussion, Government of India now says, if you are a loss incurring company, a public sector undertaking mind you, then I will not have any option either to sell it off or shut it down. I'll give a current affairs example so that you understand. Air India company. Air India was a government carrier. Government of India realized that they are not able to generate revenues. Forget about generating revenues. Government is paying money for Air India to sustain its activities. Government of India finally had enough of it and sold it off to a private sector company. And please remember this. Very recently, Government of India has come out with a new disinvestment policy. And under the new disinvestment policy, telecom sector is a part of the strategic sector. That is, under the new disinvestment policy, the sectors have been divided into two parts, strategic and non-strategic. In case of strategic sector, government says I will have minimum presence, very minimum, that is maximum 4 units or undertakings will be under the ownership of Government of India. Whereas in case of non-strategic sector, government will not have any kind of ownership. So telecom sector is part of strategic sector itself. So government citing that it is a part of strategic sector, government wants to have a competition or a competitor owned by it in the market. Government wants to achieve certain social welfare objective, and government wants to promote usage of broadband in rural parts of India. That is, there is a scheme or let's say program of the Government of India, Bharat Broadband or BharatNet, which has been implemented or which is being implemented by Bharat Broadband Network Limited. And government wants to ensure that the villages or let's say the panchayats are getting access to high-speed broadband connectivity. So keeping in mind all of these particular reasons, Cabinet very recently has cleared this revival package. Having said so, what are the points that you need to understand here? Right? What is the situation of BSNL? First and foremost, understand this. The last time BSNL reported a profit was back in the 2008 and 9. Back in the 2008 and 9, more than a decade now. In the last 5 years, BSNL put together, that is for the last 5 years, has incurred a loss of more than 50,000 crore rupees. And is it the first time that a package has been announced by the government for BSNL? Absolutely no. Couple of years ago, Government of India, that is back in the 2019, government announced a package of around 70,000 crore rupees. And out of 70,000 crore rupees, around 24,000 crore rupees was actually spent on providing VRS, voluntary retirement, right, package for the employees of the BSNL. So these are certain very important points regarding the BSNL. Now what has been proposed under this latest revival package? The total amount that has been proposed is 1.64 lakh crore rupees. But please remember this, all this 1.64 lakh crore rupees, one, is not in the form of cash. That's the first point. And second, will not be provided in a single year. This has been spread for multiple years, that is 4 years. And Government of India's document simply says that by 26-27, we expect with this revival package, they expect that BSNL will start making profits in the next couple of years. Now, what are the important points in this package? Before I go forward, please do not mug up all of these particular numbers. UPSC is not very big on these particular numbers. Please don't mug up. What has been proposed by the government? First thing, just like every telecom company, even BSNL has to pay certain amount of money in the form of AGR dues, adjusted gross revenue. AGR dues, adjusted gross revenues. And government says BSNL owes around 33,000 crore worth of AGR dues, which they don't have to pay in the form of money now because they don't have money. They have been incurring losses. Government would be paying money to the BSNL and BSNL would be in return paying off the AGR dues to the government. Now, some of you might be thinking, sir, what is this logic? Government will give money and the telecom company will give it back to government. What is the logic? Right? Government is giving and taking. It's not as simple as that. Government will give, let's say, 33,000 crores. In return, government will be getting certain equity, certain ownership in the BSNL. It will be increasing its ownership in the BSNL. That's the first point. Second very important point, BSNL as well as MTNL. They have a lot of debt. For example, the data says BSNL has a debt of more than 33,000 crore rupees. Now government says whenever BSNL and the MTNL, they want to raise money in the market, government will be providing sovereign guarantee. The bonds which are being issued by these particular companies, the return payment on this will be guaranteed by the government. That is the meaning of the sovereign guarantee here. So they have asked these particular companies to go to the market, issue the bonds. Government is guaranteeing the payment. That is a sovereign guarantee. Third, BSNL, if you have observed, does not provide 4G services. Now government says, I will make spectrum allocation to you in the bandwidth of 900 and 1800 megahertz, and using this particular spectrum, which is worth the value of more than 44,000 crore rupees, you can start providing 4G services. Apart from this, Government of India has developed or has basically promoted development of 4G technology, that is a 4G stack, right, within the domestic market, Atmanirbhar 4G stack. BSNL will be used for deployment of this particular technology. Next, in case of rural market, there are certain services which are supposed to be provided. Economically, please understand, the services needs to be provided. If you look at it, people in rural part of India needs to get the access to these services, telecom services by the way. But in return, the revenues are not sufficient. In simple terms, the services or provision of the services is economically justified. But there is a concern over financial viability of these particular services. In that particular context, Government of India says, I will provide assistance to you to the extent of 13,800 crore rupees. I'm just rounding off the number. 13,800 crores. And this will be referred to as a concept of viability gap funding. VGF. Very famous. Very often you will come across the concept of VGF in the context of public-private partnership. What is this idea of VGF? Imagine you're a private developer. I will ask you to provide a certain service or develop certain project and maintain the project. You are concerned about revenue. You are concerned about how much revenue will I be able to generate if I spend this much. But as a government, I am worried whether you will construct the project or not, whether you will demand raw material, whether you are going to create labor or not. So remember the logic here, whenever the economic justification is there for a project, but there is always a concern over financial viability of the project. In such cases, government generally provides a certain assistance which is called as viability gap funding. So 13,000 odd crore rupees will be provided in the form of VGF in order to provide rural wireline operations. And the government will be reissued with the preference shares worth 7,500 crores by BSNL. Out of the total amount of money that has been invested in the BSNL, right, that is authorized capital, right, issued capital, equity capital, preference share, etc., the BSNL will be reissuing 7,500 crore worth of preference share to government, and government will be making this particular contribution in the form of capital or investing in the form of capital again in the BSNL. The whole object of the government of India through these particular reforms package is very simple. I want to turn around the functioning of the BSNL. I want to reduce the stress that is there in the balance sheet of the BSNL. I want to promote BSNL into a profitable organization. With those objectives, Government of India has announced so many reforms or a package for the BSNL. Then in addition to this, I've already mentioned that the BBNL, which is implementing BharatNet, will be merged or will be brought under BSNL now. These are the very important let's say points under the reforms package announced by the government. Now, based on the discussion that we have had, I've given one MCQ. Consider the following statements regarding preference shares. These shareholders will have a preferential rights over the common shareholders. Statement 1 is correct. Sir, what do you mean by this? When you study the financial market in the static part, one instrument that you come across within the financial market is the concept of preference shares. There is a common stock share or a common stock and a preference stock, or preference shareholders, common shareholders. The basic difference is very simple. In case of common stock or common shareholders, there is no guaranteed dividend that is paid. Whereas if you are a preference shareholder, generally there are multiple types again within the preference shareholders. Generally, the amount of dividend that is announced to you, it is fixed. So the preference shareholders will have rights over the common shareholders. Statement 1 is correct. These shareholders have a right to vote. Statement 2 is wrong. Preference shareholders do not have a right to vote. Common shareholders or common stockholders have a right to vote. Right option for this particular question is option A, only 1 is correct. Next article is regarding Federal Reserve. Very simple factual article or factual information has been provided. The Federal Reserve, which is a central banker of USA, just like we have Reserve Bank of India, has announced a rate hike again. How much has been the rate hike? The federal funds rate, FFR, federal funds rate has been hiked by 75 basis points. In simple terms, it has been increased by 0.75%. Taking the federal funds rate to 2.25% to 2.5%. Why this particular funds rate has been hiked? Simple, the inflation rate has reached to a very high level. So what is the rate? Should I mug up? Please don't mug up. Not important. By the time you write the exam, this will be different. So please don't mug up. The inflation rate has increased. It's a cause of concern, just like it is a cause of concern in case of India, and has reached multi-decadal high, that is a 40-year high. And the federal funds rate earlier also had increased the federal funds rate, or Federal Reserve earlier also had increased the federal funds rate by 0.75%, and for the second consecutive straight time has announced increasing the FFR again by 0.75%. And this is the fourth time when they have increased the federal funds rate in order to control inflation. Now the concern here is very simple. 2 points here. One, sir, what is the impact of a hike in the federal funds rate? Simple, loans will become very costly in USA. The money supply is expected to come down. And what is the impact of that on India? The impact is already we are experiencing a huge amount of outflow of foreign investment. Capital outflow is being observed. And with the further hike in this, we are expecting further outflow of the foreign investments or capital outflows to become much more stronger in the coming months. So these are certain very important points in the context of this article. And mind you, look at the language used in the article. The Federal Reserve Chairman clearly has stated that they know that with the rise in the interest rate like this or federal funds rate, interest rates will become costly, loans will become costly, and that might pull back, that might have a limiting impact on the economy. There could be a slowdown in the economy, and they are willing to bear it out. They are simply saying, we know that it is going to slow down, pull back the economy like this, and we are willing to bear that particular issue. Right? We will take care of it when it will happen. But our primary concern is to control inflation now. So these are certain important points regarding the article. Let me go to the next article. The fertilizer imports from Russia have increased. And not just that, Russia has become the top exporter, right, to India in terms of fertilizer exports. What are the important points here? Earlier videos also we have been discussing about fertilizer issue in India. India imports fertilizers. That's a fact. It's not a contention, that's a fact. We import a lot of fertilizers. We import urea, we import NPK complex fertilizers, we import diammonium phosphate, and in fact, in the context of muriate of potash, MOP, in the context of muriate of potash, we are completely dependent on imports itself. But earlier, when you looked at which countries are exporting what kind of fertilizers to us, there are different countries. For example, right, the country such as China is a top exporter earlier of DAP to us. But in recent times, because of various issues that have been taking place in the global market, the context of this, the import of fertilizer, the combination has actually changed. That is, for the first quarter in the current financial year 23, we have imported huge amount of fertilizer from Russia. How much? More than 7.7 lakh tons of fertilizers we have imported. Why this particular point is important? First thing, if you compare how much we have imported just in this particular quarter of the financial year 23, this is more than 70% of total imports that we did in the last year from Russia. I hope you understand this. Last year, totally, we imported 11 lakh tons of fertilizers from Russia. And in the current financial year, only in one quarter, we have imported more than 7.7 lakh tons of the fertilizers. What kind of fertilizers? We import diammonium phosphate, and we have also imported NPK complex fertilizers. Most of it is in the form of NPK complex, right? And some of it is in the form of diammonium phosphate itself. Now, apart from this, what are the other countries from where we actually import? We import from Saudi Arabia, and this is the data. Please have a look at it. Please don't mug up everything. Not important. Just have a glance of this particular data. We import from Oman. We import from China. We import from Canada. And from one year to next year, you will see that there is a variation. There is a variation of how much we are importing from these particular countries. Now, apart from this, what are the other very important points? First point, please understand this. From Russia, this has worked out for us when we have imported fertilizer. This has worked out for us. This has worked in our interest. Why? When other trading partners have imposed trade restrictions, sanctions on Russia, we have entered into the picture. We have imported crude oil at a cheaper rate from Russia. And not just that, we have been able to import even fertilizers at cheaper rate from Russia. How much cheaper? 10% cheaper. 10% cheaper. Compared to the international prices, we have been able to import fertilizer from Russia at 10% lower cost. And that has worked out in our favor. But please understand, there is always this particular dilemma. Should government of India continue to be dependent on, let's say, continue to have trade relations with Russia? Or there will be a pressure tactic that is used by Western economies, just like they have cut off the trade ties, will they pressure us also to cut off the trade ties? And that will be one of the point of discussions in the coming days. Because after the sanctions were imposed, India has cautiously managed on both the sides and has been able to continue to have trade relations with Russia. So these are certain very important points regarding this particular article on fertilizer imports. I have given one MCQ here. Consider the following statements. India has signed a 5-year deal with Israel Chemicals Limited for importing diammonium phosphate. It was there very recently in the newspaper, But understand the statement here. It is regarding diammonium phosphate. Statement 1 is wrong. Sorry, what is the fact then? Right? Don't tell us half of the answer. What is the fact? Fact is very simple. India has signed a 5-year deal with ICL, that is Israel Chemicals Limited, to import muriate of potash. Muriate of potash. And I'll tell you the context why it was there in the newspaper. We used to import lot of this particular muriate of potash from Belarus. And because of the war between Russia and Ukraine, the imports from Ukraine, Belarus or that particular belt has been affected. And that is a precise reason India very recently, that is in this year itself, has signed a 5-year deal with Israel Chemicals to import muriate of potash, not DAP. Second, India imports the complete requirement of a muriate of potash. Statement 2 is correct. Right option for this question is option B, only 2. Let me go to the next article related to Russia and Ukraine signing deals. But when I say Russia and Ukraine are signing deals, a very important point to note, they are not signing deals with each other, they are signing deals with other party, that is Turkey as well as United Nations. Because of the negotiations that have taken place very recently, both of these particular countries have individually signed trade deals, not trade deals, or let's say basically deals with United Nations as well as Turkey. Now, what is the importance of this particular deal? Sir, why should I understand this particular deal? Simple, let me focus on economic area here. Both Russia and Ukraine are very important countries in terms of, let's say, exporting to international market. Right? Be it certain, let's say, minerals, be it in terms of food grains, or be it in terms of crude oil, etc. Both of these countries are very important in their own way in terms of conducting international trade. For example, once the war between Russia and Ukraine started, very often the war has been connected with global hunger, global poverty, or global inflation also. Why? These countries are exporters of food grains. For example, Ukraine, it's one of the major exporters of food grains such as wheat. But when the war broke out between Russia and Ukraine, Russia has imposed certain, let's say, blockade or restrictions with respect to exporting of food grains from Ukraine. And as a result of this, two things have happened. One, large number of stocks are lying without being exported within Ukraine itself, that is warehouses within Ukraine. And now the harvesting season is again starting. We are expecting 60 million tons of production to happen in this particular cycle. So already there is a huge amount of a stock. Production will happen. Now this is supposed to be exported. And second thing, because Russia has imposed restrictions or blockade with respect to exporting of these particular food grains, in the international market, exporting of these particular food grains or exports of these food grains has come down, supply has come down, and many countries are facing the brunt of this particular issue or facing certain issues related to availability of food grains. And that is the precise reason in recent times, the food inflation in the global market has been inching upwards. To address this particular issue, the countries have signed the deals, and as per this particular deal, some of the ports will be identified, and these ports for the next 120 days can be used for trading purposes only. If you understand this, I'll repeat it again. The agreement or the deal is for the next 120 days and can be re-signed or let's say continued again with the concurrence of both the parties. But the argument is simple. Some of the ports have been identified and these ports will be used to export food grains from Ukraine to rest of the world. On monthly basis, 5 million tons of food grains can be exported from these ports to the international market. And whatever blockade has been imposed by Russia, these blockades will not be applicable for these vessels which are going from outside countries or let's say from other countries into the war zone and bringing the food grains outside like this. This is the gist of the article provided here regarding the deal that has been signed between Russia and Ukraine. Next article is regarding wind power. What is the context of the article here? What is the importance? Understand the logic here. Couple of years ago, that is specifically back in 2017, government introduced the concept of reverse auction e-reverse auction, I'm simply writing reverse auction. Reverse auction in case of wind energy projects. WEP, wind energy projects. And in case of solar, it was introduced back in 2015 itself. So in the last couple of years, government has been following a concept of e-reverse auction. What do you mean by e-reverse auction here? Very simple. Imagine there is a place where the project has to be constructed. In a particular region, the project has to be constructed. So multiple companies would want to construct this particular project, sell electricity. The government says, I will allocate this particular project to the company which will offer electricity at lowest price to me. Hope you understand the process here? The company which will offer to sell the electricity at the lowest price, not at the highest price, lowest price, will be given or will be awarded this particular project. For example, imagine there are two companies A and B. A will say, I will sell it at let's say 4 rupees per unit. B, if they want to be considered for this particular project, has to offer the electricity at lower than 4 rupees. Let's say at 3 rupee 50 paisa per unit. And if there is one more company, and if they want to be considered for developing this particular project, they will have to offer electricity per unit at lower than 3 rupee 50 paisa. This is basically how the e-reverse auctioning process will take place. And government has been using this to promote competition and to purchase electricity at lower cost. Very simple. But as a result of this, what has happened? The wind energy generation or the wind energy addition, especially in the last couple of years, has slowed down. In many of the years, wind energy capacity addition has been there in very low single digit numbers. And in some of the years, right, it has been very, very low, abysmally very low. And when you compare this within the last 10 years or let's say last decade, you will realize that in the, let's say, the period before 2016, the wind energy capacity addition has been happening in double digit numbers. And when you compare between, let's say, solar and wind energy had a move on, or let's say participation of the private sector, government interest, etc. 10 years before the solar energy. Solar energy has become very, very famous in the last 1.5 decade. But much before that, wind energy was actually promoted. But if you see how much has been the capacity within the wind now, compare that with, let's say, solar energy capacity addition has been much, much higher today. For example, out of the total 100 plus gigawatts of the renewable energy capacity in India, around 57 gigawatts is of solar and around 40 plus is of wind. What has been the reason? Many of the participants in the sector point their fingers towards the concept of reverse auctioning itself. Why? Understand the logic here. When you want the companies to bid like this at the lowest price and get the project, what if I am one of the companies, let's say company C, which has bid at let's say 3 rupee 20 paisa per unit, and I will sell the electricity to you. But when I start constructing the project, the cost of acquiring land increases, the cost of importing the machinery increases, and as a result of this, now I will not be able to sell the electricity at 3 rupee 20 paisa. Either I want you to renegotiate or I will not be able to complete the project. And that is the precise reason many of the company, let's say, or many of the industry leaders or the bigger companies within this particular industry have not been participating in this particular auctioning process. And they have been wanting the government of India to withdraw this particular e-reverse auctioning process. Now, very recently, government of India stated, yes, we will be withdrawing the e-reverse auctioning. Right? They will be withdrawing the concept of e-reverse auctioning. A new model will be implemented. Okay, a new model will be implemented. And understand the another impact of this particular process that has been followed by the government. With introduction of e-reverse auctioning and many companies staying away from participating of e-reverse auctioning, whatever few players were there, either they have, in order to win the bid or in order to win the project, they have quoted a very, very low number which they are unable to manage today, or these participants have moved away, and as a result of this, demand for the domestic manufacturers has actually come down. And because the demand has come down, many companies which are involved in the manufacturing of wind turbines within the domestic market, either they have incurred losses, they have been forced to remove employees, and many of them have actually shut down the business operations itself. So that has been the article, or that has been the issue related to wind power, and government very recently has announced they will be stopping reverse auction now. They will be stopping the process of reverse auctioning. Done. So this is a gist of the article provided. Last article for the day related to gig workers. In the earlier classes or earlier videos, we've already discussed a certain concepts related to gig workers. Sir, in what context did we discuss related to gig workers? I've discussed in the context of Niti Aayog publishing a report on the gig economy. And in addition to that, if you need much more information, if at all, let's say a question is asked in the UPSC mains, if you need additional information, very recently, one more data point has been provided, or one more survey has been conducted, but not by Niti Aayog, some other private sector university. That is, Kriya University has conducted a survey, right, and has given certain data, which you can use to put forward certain points when you're writing answers for the UPSC mains. What are the important points here? First, have a look at this. Although India is one of the biggest economies in terms of employing gig workers, right? In fact, India is one of the biggest economies. Large number of companies within India, especially those particular companies which are involved in delivering food, delivering commodities within a stipulated, let's say, very, very less time period like this, right? For example, Zomato, Swiggy, Blinkit, etc. These employ large number of gig workers as well as platform workers. But the article simply says that although it is one of the largest employers of the gig workers, on an average, these particular gig workers earn around 18,000 rupees per month. And majority of the households, right, whichever have been surveyed here, majority of the households, this is the same person who is the sole bread earner of the household. And the point becomes much more murky, or let's say concerning, when you look at the next point and realize that even this particular amount is not sufficient for this particular person. Although the average earning is 18,000, majority of the respondents have stated that it is not sufficient for them. They are falling short of another 5,000 rupees. So this is one point. Second, what about the saving habit of these particular gig workers? Do they have any kind of a planning? Right? Do they get access to social security benefits? Because Government of India through Social Security Code is aiming to provide that social security benefit to the same workers. Do they have the habit of keeping a track of their expenditures, etc.? Answers are here. First, gig workers, do they plan? Most of the gig workers basically stated, no, we never plan, which also means they have very less or no savings at all. That is a point of concern. Why it's a point of concern? If I'm a gig worker, I do not have any savings, and I don't know when I'll be removed from the company, this increases the stress level. And when the stress increases, obviously it will reflect in my productivity. That is a point you need to remember. It is going to have an impact on the productivity of the gig worker. And have a look at this, right? Most of the workers, most of these particular gig workers work in the unorganized sector, right? Most of them are working in the unorganized sector, which also means there is no guaranteed salary, guaranteed growth, or even job security is not provided to these particular workers. So these are certain very important points regarding the gig workers which has been provided in the new study that has been conducted by Kriya University. So these are the various articles as well as the questions related to articles for the duration 23rd to 29th July 2022. If you like the initiative, hit the like button, provide your valuable comments in the section below, and if you are yet to subscribe to BYJU'S Exam Prep, kindly do now. Thank you. Have a great day.